Professional wrestling is built on illusion, blood that's real, pain that's performative, and silence that's deadly. For decades, the industry treated concussions like sprained ankles. Part of the game, no big deal, walk it off. Punch drunk was the old school term, borrowed from boxing, a crude way of describing the slurred speech, mood swings, and vacant stares of men who'd taken too many shots to the head. In wrestling, it was brushed off with a laugh and a slap on the back. You weren't hurt, you were just tough. But behind the curtain, something was breaking. Quietly, systematically. Across generations and territories, wrestlers began losing memories, losing control, and eventually losing their lives. What looked like old age or bad habits was often something deeper: chronic traumatic encephalopathy. CTE wasn't invented in a lab, it was forged in rings, concrete floors, and steel chair shots. And for the better part of 50 years, no one wanted to talk about it. The promotions looked the other way. The boys in the locker room masked symptoms with pills and pride. Doctors either weren't asked or weren't there. And when the truth finally came crashing down, with suicides, murders, lawsuits, and congressional heat, it didn't just reveal a health crisis. It exposed a culture that had learned to profit off head trauma and call it entertainment. This is how wrestling buried the truth, one bump at a time. In 1928, a New Jersey pathologist named Harrison Martland dropped a bomb on the fight world. He called it punch-drunk syndrome, describing boxers who slurred their words, staggered when they walked, and suffered sudden emotional outbursts. The medical term would evolve: dementia pugilistica, then eventually CTE, but the signs were already there. Too many blows to the head caused brain damage, simple as that. Boxing tried to understand it. They didn't fix it, but at least they gave it a name. Wrestling? Wrestling took one look at the evidence, cracked its neck, and dove face first into the mat. Throughout the 20th century, pro wrestling operated in its own world, a hybrid of live stunt work, carnivals, and backroom bravado. And while it borrowed boxing's structure, rounds, belts, blood, it ignored its science. The mentality in the territories was brutally simple. If you weren't knocked out, you were fine. If you were knocked out, you'd better be back on the card next week. Steel chairs, headbutts, concrete bumps, turnbuckle spots where you aim for your skull. Promotions had no medical staff. Ringside doctors were for commissions, not concussions. And since no one was keeping score, the brain trauma piled up in silence. Early deaths, like Yukon Eric's suicide or Wilbur Snyder's rapid decline, were chalked up to stress or alcohol. Nobody wanted to admit that working hurt people. Even the boys themselves refused to talk about it. Why would they? Admitting you were punch drunk was like admitting you were broken. And broken didn't get booked. By the time doctors officially linked repeated head trauma to long-term neurodegeneration in sports like football and boxing, wrestling was decades behind and had no interest in catching up. In fact, it had just entered the chair shot to the face era. In the territorial era, getting concussed wasn't a crisis. It was a badge of honor you weren't supposed to talk about. Every locker room had its own brand of denial, but the rule was the same from Amarillo to Allentown. Don't sell the headache. Real men got dizzy and worked through it. You didn't forget your finish? Then you're good, kid. There was no concussion protocol. There wasn't even a clipboard. Guys got rocked by a stiff lariat or a missed post bump, and the only check was someone slapping you and yelling, "You good?" If you nodded, that was it. Back to work. Head trauma was seen as a fluke, not a pattern. And if your memory got patchy or your fuse got short, that was just ring rust. Veterans passed it down like gospel. Harley Race, Haku, Dynamite Kid, legends who prided themselves on surviving pain, not questioning it. Wrestlers were accustomed to trauma and surrounded by silence. A guy could have a seizure in the back and someone would still joke, "Guess he's selling real good." Medical knowledge wasn't just missing, it was actively ignored. If a promoter did notice signs of cognitive damage, he'd either bury it, book around it, or fire the guy. There were no long-term contracts, no health insurance, no follow-ups, just your spot, your blade, and your pride. And when careers ended, things got darker. Wahoo McDaniel, Dick Murdoch, and Gino Hernandez all showed possible signs of CTE, outbursts, confusion, depression, long before the term existed in wrestling circles. But no autopsies were done, no one wanted to know. Too many questions meant too many lawsuits. This was the system. Pain, perform, forget, repeat. Every bump built your legend and erased a piece of you. On June 25th, 2007, Chris Benoit's name stopped meaning technician, work rate, or WrestleMania. It became a symbol of horror, The murder-suicide that claimed the lives of Nancy Benois and their 7-year-old son Daniel shocked the industry and shattered its wall of silence around head trauma. WWE's initial response was frantic damage control. First came the tribute show, then came the erasure. But science doesn't vanish as easily as a wrestler from the archives. Just weeks later, Dr. Bennett Omalu, the same neuropathologist who exposed CTE in the NFL, examined Benoit's brain. The results were devastating. His brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient, not just injured, decayed. This wasn't storyline. This was structural failure. And Benoit's case lit the fuse. Dozens of wrestlers stepped forward. Nowinski, a former WWE mid-carder and Harvard grad, became the unlikely whistleblower, founding the Concussion Legacy Foundation. He'd suffered concussions of his own, but Benoit's death pushed him into advocacy and made CTE part of wrestling's vocabulary overnight. Suddenly, WWE and other promotions couldn't pretend anymore. Lawsuits followed. Grieving families demanded answers. The autopsies on Axel Rotten, Balls Mahoney, and Andrew Test Martin all confirmed CTE. Their brains, too, showed trauma no one had treated, acknowledged, or even recorded during their careers. But here's the rub. Nothing changed overnight. Yes, unprotected chair shots were banned. Yes, the company launched a wellness policy. But there was no admission of guilt and no back pay for the hundreds of veterans who had quietly lost themselves before Benoit lost everything. For years, the public believed wrestlers simply burned out or got hooked on pills. Now we know they were suffering a disease that looked like punishment and had been sold to fans as drama. This wasn't the end. It was the moment people realized there'd never been a beginning. After the Benoit tragedy, WWE had a choice: confront its history of unprotected chair shots, reckless scheduling, and zero medical oversight, or control the narrative before anyone else could. Guess which one they picked. WWE's concussion response wasn't medical, it was strategic. By 2010, they'd phased out chair shots to the head, banned pile drivers, and hired concussion specialists. On paper, it looked like a revolution. Behind the scenes, it was a cleanup job with corporate polish. The company launched its own research, partnering with doctors like Dr. Joseph Maroon, a respected neurosurgeon who also happened to sit on the NFL's Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. Maroon claimed WWE had a far lower incidence of concussions than other contact sports. Which sounds great, until you remember, there's no independent oversight. WWE controls who gets tested, when, and what gets released. This wasn't about discovering truth, it was about limiting liability. When wrestlers like Billy Jack Haynes, Vito LaGrasso, and Adam Mercer filed a class action suit against the WWE in 2015, alleging the company concealed head injury risks, WWE lawyered up fast. Their defense? Wrestling isn't a sport, it's performance. And the talent are independent contractors, not employees. Translation: not our fault. The suit was eventually dismissed, but not because the science was wrong, because the statute of limitations expired. The judge never ruled on whether the WWE covered up the risk, just that too much time had passed to sue them for it. Meanwhile, the WWE amped up PR. CTE testing, baseline protocols, impact testing, yearly physicals. But only for current talent. If you were a legend, a guy from the 80s, good luck. The past wasn't profitable. By the late 2010s, the company had rewritten the brain trauma story. They weren't villains, they were pioneers, trailblazers. And if a few more names quietly disappeared, well, at least they weren't swinging chairs anymore. Today, wrestling wants you to believe the war on concussions is over. That CTE is an old problem, a solved issue, a thing from the Benoit years. Safer rings, no headshots. Concussion protocol. The buzzwords are there. The reality still isn't. Yes, things have changed. WWE now pulls wrestlers with head trauma symptoms. AEW uses on-site medical staff, gives updates when someone's concussed. There are return-to-play standards, baseline cognitive testing, and neurologists on retainer. It all sounds clinical, controlled, modern. But it's still pro wrestling, and the culture still rewards silence. Just ask Bryan Danielson, who's admitted on record to hiding concussion symptoms for years, or Adam Cole, who's been shelved indefinitely after multiple confirmed concussions in AEW. These aren't old-timers from the territory days. They're top stars right now, and the problem isn't just the bumps, it's the grind, the schedule. The expectation to work hurt because the business doesn't pause for your brain scan. Meanwhile, no major promotion has publicly committed to posthumous brain donation programs. There's no union, no industry-wide policy, and no long-term care plan. Once you're gone, you're gone. CTE diagnosis can only happen after death. That's convenient for an industry built on plausible deniability. The chair shots may have stopped, but subconcussive trauma, repetitive, minor impacts that accumulate damage, is still common in matches filled with strikes, dives, and stiff bumps. Wrestling's greatest sleight of hand isn't in the ring, it's how the industry rebranded its damage. Today, brain trauma isn't denied, it's just managed, marketed, and spun. Concussion awareness is a talking point. Protect the talent is a slogan. But the system hasn't changed. It just got better at hiding the blood. Pro wrestling's concussion crisis wasn't born out of ignorance. It was designed by culture, enforced by silence. Getting knocked loopy was part of the game. Speaking up meant losing your push, and dying young, just a bad break. They called it toughness. They called it grit. But what they really did was market brain trauma as entertainment and dared anyone to complain. Even now, with protocols in place, the business still celebrates pain, still buries the past, still books the next bump. Because in wrestling, the damage never stopped. It just got a press release. If this story hit hard, it should. So hit that like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you've seen the industry's silent damage for yourself. Wrestling protects its image. We protect the truth. No fluff, no PR, just facts the business won't say out loud. More history, more pain, more blood under the mat coming soon. This is the one bump they still don't know how to take. Thanks for watching.